This is my short review on the Tein Flex A coilovers. I've had them for around a month now. To start off, what are these coilovers? The Tein Flex A's are slightly above entry-level coilovers. In this price range, most of the coilovers are monotube style, but the Tein are twin tube. The reason why I chose, one of the big reasons why I did choose the Teins over the competition in the price range like BC, Coilovers, Case 4. With at least a twin tube, in theory, it's supposed to give better ride quality on the road for daily driving. With monotube, they should be better on the track because they're better at dissipating heat and they won't have the aeration problem with the oil. But I'm not doing that. I'm daily driving this car, so that didn't matter much to me. And with monotube, you do have less stroke travel in the shock, so that's why I went with the Tein, because since they're twin tube, and there's not really any options at the price point for twin tube coilovers besides the Teins. That's the main reason. And the reason why I went to the Flex series is because the lower series, to adjust the height, you're adjusting through preload, but with the Flex series, you adjust the height independently from preload. So that's the main reason for that. And in the Flex series, there's the Flex A and the Flex E. I chose the Flex A because it had the hydraulic bump stop, which is supposed to help, improve the ride quality. I can't tell for sure if it's better than the Flex E because I don't have it to compare, but they're supposed to be more comfortable when you hit the bump stops. So that's the main reason why I bought this coilover and what they are. When I first got them, the box was damaged. There was a hole. I should have a picture on the screen right now, but there was a hole in it, and inside one of the coilover threads were damaged. They were bent a little bit, but it wasn't too big of a deal since the threads were in the middle, and I wasn't going to slam the car, so the threads weren't being used anyways. But that was something that was damaged, as well as some of the paint was scratched too. I won't blame Tein for this because my coilovers were delayed by shipping by probably about a month because I moved and then the shipping it didn't arrive, so then they kept shipping it to my old address and it kept going back and forth. So it was in the mail for probably a month, just going back and forth, and it got banged up from that. So I can't blame Tein too much for the damage there. If you do plan on picking up these coilovers or any coilovers, I do recommend getting a set of adjustable front end links if they don't come with it, as well as rear load control arms that can adjust the camber on it, because with the factory rear load control arms, there's no camber adjustment, and on these cars especially, when you lower them, the rear gets a lot of negative camber. Overall, the installation went pretty smoothly. It's straightforward, and if you want to get in-depth guide how to install it, just look on YouTube. There's a bunch of videos that would have done a way better job explaining than I would for the installation, so just look that up online. But I'll just mention any issues or any tips I can give you from my installation process. The first thing that might not apply to you, but apply for anyone who drives a car in winter and they salt the roads, is that with the rust. So with the rust, the main bolts on the struts weren't too hard to remove, but the front spray bar end links, those were a complete pain, and I ended up cutting them off with an angle grinder because they were so rusted on. So that's another reason why I do recommend getting new end links when you place your coilovers or suspension, is because you might run into the issue, but there's also another issue why you might want adjustable end links. I'll talk about that later. I guess something I can mention before the installation, it's a good idea to check the preload on the springs. From factory they do come preloaded, but as I mentioned, it can be moved from shipping, so it's good to check it, as well as disassemble most of the coilover and put some anti-seize on the threads if you live somewhere where they salt the roads, or if you just don't want them to rust too quickly, so you can still make adjustments like maybe a few years down the road. So that's one thing I can recommend doing. After the first drive, I realized there was a few things that I went wrong with installation. Notably was that when I turn left, it'll make a loud screeching noise, and at first I thought maybe that's a preload issue. So I redid all the preload in the front. and from the factory, the pillow ball mount, they come Teflon coated, so you shouldn't need to do that anyways. So that didn't fix anything. I also checked the top nut, make sure it's tight. That was tight. So I spent a while just messing around and everything, and I realized what the problem was. And the problem was that I set my endlinks incorrectly. When I installed endlinks, I didn't have a set of ramps that I can drive up to and set the preload to 0. So when I read what I read online is that for coilovers, you should adjust the endlinks to be a little bit shorter than factory. So I did that, and when I was just messing around, I got tired of, you know, I kind of ran out of solutions why it's making noise. So then I just started playing around with endlinks, and at first I just changed the endlinks back to factory length, and it still made the noise but a lot less. After staying to factory length and made a little bit less noise, I made it a little bit longer than factory, and you know, the noise went away. Then I was reading on another forum and it mentioned that, yeah, that's actually the way to go. And I'll show you a diagram right now that can better illustrate why you'll want to make it a little longer. And it makes a lot more sense now, because when you're lowering the car, at least with coilovers, that has the threads independently for the height, you're moving the bracket upwards. So you have to lengthen the end length so it can reach there properly. Another issue I had was on one of my front coilovers, when I go over a bump, it'll make a squeaking noise. It kind of sounds like the oil in the shock is bubbling in a way. I can't hard to explain, but I was trying to figure it out. I thought it was a preload issue again. I can't mess around with that, which was a waste of time. And I was reading somewhere online about how someone had a similar issue about this. Not the same coilover, but just a similar issue. And it went away when they stiffened up the dampening. They adjusted the dampening up a little bit. So I did that. When adjusting the dampening, I realized that some reason on that one coilover, the dampening got reset all the way to full soft. So after readjusting it to slightly softer medium, the noise went away. So that was the issue there. I'm considering I might need to just put some tape over the dampening adjustment in case it turns again by itself. Probably from all the potholes I ran into. And mentioning potholes, in one of my early rides when I first installed these coilovers, I hit a very big pothole and it moved the front camber adjustment all the way to the negative camber. So make sure you tighten those bolts up very nicely. Not too tight because it's strip easily, but make sure they're tight so that doesn't happen to you. Now to the actual view of the coilover ride quality and how they handle. The current damping setup I have set is in the front 11 clicks from full hard. So there's 16 levels of adjustment. So 0 is full soft and 16 is full hard. And in the front it's 11 from full hard, so softer than the medium. In the back it's 12 from full hard, so a little bit softer in the back. So that's the setup I've been using. My thoughts on the ride quality would be based off the previous setup that I had in the car, which was RSR lowering springs. This car, when I bought it, only had the lowering springs, so I never experienced the regular springs. But I think the lowering springs is fairly similar to the factory setup. Overall, the ride quality is not that much worse than the lowering springs. You can definitely feel it's stiffer, but not unbearable. Over small and medium bumps, I might even say they feel better than the stock suspension lowering springs. But with large bumps and potholes, I'll say they're worse than the stock suspension with lowering springs. It's very aggressive when you hit a big pothole and bottom out. And what doesn't help with that is the mounts. The mounts are solid, there's no rubber on it, so that transmits a lot more noise and vibration through the car body. But that's the worst case scenario. Going back to like small and medium bumps, the best way to describe it is that the suspension feels a lot more sharper. The damping is a lot quicker. When you hit a bump, the car will return back to its normal position a lot quicker than the stock suspension. Where I'm driving around, the roads are pretty bad, and I would say, at least in the summer right now, it's bearable. But you still want to avoid any large potholes or bumps. This is with the stock spring rate, which is 6K front and 6K rear. And again, this is another reason why I went with this coilover, is that it's somewhat lower than the other options out there. For example, a lot of other options start at 8K front and rear, which is slightly stiffer. In terms of the handling, I haven't taken this car to track or haven't really pushed the car that hard. The stock suspension with lowering springs already felt flat, but with the coilovers, the car is very flat now. after dealing with all the small hiccups in installation, the coilovers have basically no noise. It's like stock suspension. When you hit a bump, there's no weird clunking, there's no weird rattles or anything. That's after dealing with all the setup issues. But now, you know, over bumps, it feels solid over bumps. One thing worth mentioning is that when I first installed it, I was getting some noise in the back, and they sounded like the endlinks were bad, so I did end up replacing both rear endlinks. But after replacing those endlinks, I still had the noise. And after looking around a lot and, you know, retorquing all the bolts and whatnot, I realized the problem was that the emergency jack and the foam holding it was moving around, because with the damping adjustment, it pushes up on the carpet so that the carpet can't push down on the foam and jack, so that it moves around. One big reason why I decided to get these coilovers over the lowering springs I already had in the car was that with the lowering springs, it hit the bump stops very easily. Even over small speed bumps, going at low speeds, the car will hit the bump stops, and that's when it gets really harsh. Because the lowering springs, they actually ride, you know, almost like stock over most bumps, but once you hit the bump stops, it's a big thud. That happened a lot more often than I wanted to. So with the coilovers, they're stiffer, and my thought behind that is with a stiffer spring, it'll hit the bump stops less often. And to be honest, like from what I've, you know, noticed from the short term I had these coilovers, that they don't hit the bump stops as often, but when they hit the bump stops, even with the hydraulic bump stops, they're still pretty aggressive when you hit the bump stops. But honestly, besides those few things, there's not much to talk about with the, you know, ride quality and the handling. It's just the simple answer is that they handle a lot better than lowering springs and stock suspension, and I'm gonna assume stock suspension as well. And the ride quality is close to stock, but with the bigger bumps, it's definitely harsher in those. To conclude my short review on these coilovers, I'll say they're fairly low price, but high quality entry-level coilover that can give you a lot better handling and lower your car. But keep in mind, you won't be able to slam your car if that's your thing. The ride quality is definitely stiffer and harsher than stock. Where I live, the roads are terrible, and so far it's livable, but it's the summer right now, so there's not as many potholes as if it was winter. Compared to other coilovers in this price range and spec-wise, there's not too many options. I say that not because of the price range, it's because of most coilovers in this price range have a lot higher spring rate than 6K front and rear. The only other coilover I can think of that have a fairly soft, I use air quotes for soft, spring rate are the Meister CRDs. They have a 5K spring rate, which is very soft for coilovers, and I've heard they're, you know, very comfortable. But I haven't tried them out yet, so I can't comment on how they actually ride or not, or the quality of them. And the other competitors, of course, is also a Tein, is the Flex A series, which is the same coilover but without the hydraulic bump stop. Would I recommend getting these coilovers if you're in the market for getting a set of entry-level coilovers? And I would say yes, including the others. I would say maybe the Meister ZS CRD, any of the ST series, which is just a cheaper KW. With the ST coilovers and the KW V1s at least, to adjust the height, you're adjusting through preload, and so you don't have independent height adjustments. There's also the BC coilovers. Even with the custom spring rates, I don't think they go below 8K front and rear. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you guys have any questions.